The nightmare always started the same way. Caleb Ashford stood on the bank of Miller's Pond, phone gripped in his shaking hand, watching his sister's Honda Civic sink into black water. The rear lights glowed red beneath the surface like dying embers. Steam rose where metal met ice. Naomi's hand pressed against the back window, pale fingers spread wide. Mouth open in a scream he couldn't hear through the glass. He had frozen, thumb hovering over the 9, over the 1 again. Every second a small eternity, every heartbeat a choice he didn't make. By the time he'd jumped in the car had settled too deep. By the time the ambulance arrived, her lips were blue. 7 years had passed since that January night, but the cold never left his bones. Caleb woke gasping in the pre-dawn dark of his trailer sheets, damp with sweat, despite the Montana winter pressing against thin walls. His hand went to his chest, feeling for the rapid hammer of his pulse. Beside the narrow bed, Gunnar lifted his head, amber eyes catching the faint glow of the space heater. The German shepherd rose in one fluid motion, placing his broad skull on the mattress close enough that Caleb could feel the warmth of his breath. "I'm all right, boy," Caleb whispered, though his voice betrayed him with its tremor. "Just the same old ghosts." Gunnar's tail gave a single slow sweep, unconvinced but patient. The dog was 6 years old, muscle and scars wrapped in a coat of black and tan. A jagged line of pale tissue ran along his right flank where an IED fragment had torn through fur and flesh during his final deployment in Syria. They'd both come home broken in different ways. The Navy had retired Caleb with an honorable discharge, a Purple Heart he kept in a drawer, and a lower back that sent lightning up his spine whenever the weather turned. Gunnar had been shipped to a veteran shelter in Bozeman, deemed too damaged for continued service, but too trained to adapt to civilian life. They'd found each other 4 years ago on a day when Caleb had been looking for a reason not to swallow his service pistol. The dog had been curled in the back of a kennel, ignoring the other animals, ignoring the staff, his gaze fixed on nothing. When Caleb approached, Gunnar had simply looked at him once, then stood and walked to the gate, no barking, no pleading, just a calm certainty that said, "I know what you are, I know what you've lost, we're the same." Now at 5:30 in the morning on a Thursday in late February they ran. Caleb's breath misted in the frigid air as his boots crunched through 3 inches of fresh snow. The sky hung low and gray, pregnant with more weather. Wind cut through his worn thermal jacket, but the movement warmed him from within, blood pumping away the nightmare's residue. Gunnar loped beside him with an easy, Grace ears forward nose, sampling every shift in the wind. They followed their usual route along County Road 12 past darkened houses and skeletal cottonwoods toward the edge of town, where the road curved along the base of the mountains. The Blackwood estate rose on their left like something out of a different century. Wrought iron gates, manicured hedges dusted with snow. A circular driveway leading to a 3-story manor built of Montana stone and imported timber. Warm light glowed in several windows despite the early hour. Everett Blackwood, the man who owned half the real estate in 3 counties, apparently didn't sleep much. Caleb had never spoken to Blackwood, had only seen him twice, both times from a distance. Once at a charity gala that Caleb's former employer had dragged him to back when he'd been a logistics coordinator with benefits and a future. Once in the parking lot of Hagen's Feed and Supply, climbing into a black Range Rover that cost more than Caleb would earn in 5 years. The man was tall, silver-haired, always dressed in suits that fit like they'd been sewn onto his frame. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from never hearing the word no. They were a quarter-mile past the estate when Gunnar stopped. The dog went rigid, head snapping toward the gates they'd just passed. His ears flattened, a low growl built in his chest so deep Caleb felt it through the leash more than heard it. In 4 years he'd heard that sound exactly 3 times. Once when a drunk had tried to kick him outside a bar, once when a black bear had wandered too close to their camp during a hiking trip. Once when a man with dead eyes had followed Caleb through a grocery store parking lot with a knife poorly concealed under his jacket. It was not a sound Gunnar made lightly. "Easy," Caleb murmured, scanning the road, the trees, the estate's perimeter. His right hand moved to his hip, a reflex from years when a sidearm had always been there. Now there was only empty space and the ache of old shrapnel working its way toward the surface. Then he heard it, distant, muffled by distance and walls and the insulating blanket of snow, but unmistakable. A dog screaming, not barking, not howling, screaming, the sound an animal makes when pain crosses the threshold from bearable to unbearable, when instinct overrides training, when the only language left is raw, broken agony. Caleb's body remembered how to move before his mind could catch up. He was already running back toward the estate, Gunner surging ahead of him, leash snapping taut, then slack as Caleb let it fall. The gates stood closed but not locked. Caleb hit them with his shoulder metal, shrieking as they swung inward. Gunner was a black and tan blur across the snow-covered lawn, following the sound with the precision of a missile locked on target. The scream came again, louder now, desperate. Caleb's boots found traction on the stone path that curved around the manor toward the back gardens. His breath came hard, not from exertion, but from something older and darker, the same paralysis that had frozen him on the bank of Miller's Pond, trying to surface again, whispering, "This isn't your business. This will cost you. Walk away." But Naomi's hand was pressed against the glass in his mind, and he was done walking away. The gardens opened before him like a stage set for cruelty. Lanterns hung from iron posts, their warm glow turning the falling snow into drifting sparks of gold. A dozen people stood in a loose semicircle, champagne flutes catching the light breath misting in the cold. They wore furs and cashmere jewelry that glinted, expressions of eager anticipation. At the center of their attention stood a large archery target, the kind used for competition, with concentric rings in red and white and black. Tied to the target ropes cutting into his shoulders and hindquarters was a German shepherd. The dog was older, maybe 8 or 9, his coat a tired mix of charcoal and ash. Old scars tracked across his back and legs, the kind earned through service, through loyalty, through years of doing what humans commanded without question. His ribs showed through matted fur. One ear had a notch missing, as if something had taken a bite and kept a piece. His eyes were amber like Gunner's, but dulled at the edges, the light in them banked down to coals. An arrow protruded from his left side just behind the shoulder. Blood darkened the fur around the wound, dripping onto the snow in slow, steady drops. The dog's legs trembled. His breathing came in hitching gasps. But he held his head up, not because he felt brave, because service had taught him what dignity was, and that memory clung to him even here, even now. Standing 15 feet away, a compound bow raised and drawn, was Everett Blackwood. He looked exactly as Caleb remembered, tall, immaculate. Silver hair swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and practiced calm. Tonight he wore a navy sweater over pressed slacks, Italian loafers, somehow spotless despite the snow. His fingers were steady on the bowstring, the arrow's point aimed at the dog's chest. "Still got it," someone said from the crowd, a man in a camel hair coat. Laughter rippled. "Remarkable aim, Everett," a woman added, raising her glass. "Even in this cold." The dog flinched at the sound of their voices, ears flattening. A whimper escaped him, thin and broken. Blackwood's smile was small and cold, the expression of a man who'd confused applause with approval for so long that he no longer heard the difference. Caleb didn't think, didn't plan, didn't calculate the cost. He ran. Blackwood saw him at the last second, eyes widening, but momentum was a law even money couldn't bend. Caleb hit him shoulder first, not a punch, but a collision, the kind meant to break balance without breaking bone. The bow jerked sideways. The arrow released with a snap, burying itself harmlessly in the snow 6 feet from its intended target. Blackwood went down hard, champagne flutes shattering his carefully maintained composure, cracking like ice over deep water. For one perfect heartbeat, the garden fell silent. Then Gunner arrived. The dog didn't bark, didn't snarl. He simply launched himself at the fallen boa with the precision of a surgical strike, jaws closing on the grip with crushing force. Wood groaned. Carbon fiber cracked. The bow, expensive and imported and utterly irreplaceable, snapped cleanly in two. Gunner landed backed away 3 steps, the shattered weapon still clamped in his teeth. His eyes never left Blackwood. Guard position. Defensive stance. Ready. The bound dog's head lifted, amber eyes flaring with something like disbelief. The ropes held him to the target, but the world had shifted. Pain still throbbed with every heartbeat, but hope had found a foothold in the wreckage. Caleb moved between Blackwood and the target without raising his voice. Up close, the older man's face showed its true age. Lines around the eyes, tightness at the corners of the mouth, the faint tremor in his hands that vanity tried to hide, but fear revealed. "Don't touch me," Caleb said quietly. His tone was even almost gentle, which made it sharper. "And don't touch that dog." Blackwood scrambled to his feet, fury replacing shock. He opened his mouth to shout for security, for staff, for anyone. "If you stop me from getting him treatment," Caleb continued, his gaze locked on Blackwood's, "I will report you for animal cruelty tonight with witnesses." He gestured to the crowd without looking at them, "And I won't be quiet about it." The word witnesses landed awkwardly among the champagne and furs. A few faces paled, a few looked away. The equation was simple in brutal association with scandal versus the entertainment value of watching a man torture an animal. Most were wealthy enough that the calculation took less than 3 seconds. They began to drift away, murmuring about the cold, about prior engagements, about anything but what they'd just applauded. Security hesitated. 2 men in dark suits with stiff postures and the kind of build that came from steroids and protein shakes. They looked at Blackwood. They looked at Caleb. They looked at Gunner, who still held the broken bow, a low rumble building in his chest that said, "Try me." Blackwood's authority had cracked. In that crack, doubt seeped in like water finding stone. Caleb turned to the target and began working the ropes. His hands were steady despite the adrenaline singing through his blood. He hadn't come prepared with tools, so he tore at the fibers with brute patience, fingers going numb in the cold. Gunner moved beside him, pressing his shoulder against the bound dog's trembling flank, offering warmth and a low, reassuring rumble that said, "You're not alone anymore." When the last knot gave, the older dog sagged. Caleb caught him, careful of the arrow still lodged in his side, murmuring nonsense syllables meant only to calm. The dog's fur was coarse under his fingers, sticky with blood but warm. Alive. A woman stepped forward then, hesitant but resolute. She was in her early 60s, tall and slim, her posture elegant despite the tremor in her hands. Silver blonde hair was swept into a neat twist at the nape of her neck. She wore a simple black dress among all the glitter, and her eyes, gray and observant, held something sharper than curiosity. Maggie Hollis, Blackwood's head of household staff. Caleb had seen her twice, both times from a distance, directing caterers or organizing deliveries with quiet efficiency. "He needs a veterinarian," she said, her voice steady despite the way her fingers worried at each other. "Now!" Blackwood rounded on her, disbelief flashing across his face. "Get back inside, Margaret." She didn't move, didn't flinch, just met his gaze with the kind of calm that came from finally reaching a line she wouldn't cross. Caleb nodded to her once. Gratitude passed between them without ceremony. She didn't follow him out. She'd learned when to retreat, but she watched. And that watching would matter later. Caleb half carried the injured dog toward the gate, Gunner pacing beside them, alert and protective. The garden's sounds collapsed behind them, music and laughter fading into memory. The street felt suddenly colder, quieter, the falling snow muffling everything except the dog's labored breathing and the crunch of boots on fresh powder. Caleb's truck, a 15-year-old Ford with rust eating the wheel wells and an engine held together by prayer and duct tape, sat where he'd left it a quarter-mile down the road. He lined the back seat with his jacket, checking the wound with quick, practiced assessment. The arrow had entered at an angle, missing the lung but lodging deep in muscle and possibly nicking a rib. The bleeding was steady but not arterial, survivable if he moved fast. The dog's eyes tracked him, exhausted but trusting. A stranger's hands but gentle. A stranger's voice but kind. It was more than he'd known in a long time. Gunner hopped into the front passenger seat without being asked, sitting erect, gaze forward. Guard duty. Alert status. Mission active. Caleb drove with one hand on the wheel, the other reaching back to rest on the injured dog's shoulder, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing, anchoring himself in the warmth of a living thing that had survived the dark. Mountain Ridge Animal Clinic sat on the eastern edge of town, a low brick building with a parking lot big enough for 6 cars. Only one vehicle occupied a space, a Subaru Outback with a bumper sticker that read, "My other ride is a horse." The lights were on inside, despite the hour, a warm glow spilling through frosted windows. Dr. Fiona Whitlock met them at the door before Caleb could knock. She was 49, compact and efficient, with dark brown hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes sharpened by fatigue and 20 years of emergency calls. She took one look at the blood, the arrow, the trembling animal, and stepped aside. "Bring him through to the surgical suite." She asked few questions because the answers were written in blood and rope burns and the way the dog's eyes tracked movement, with the wariness of something that had learned cruelty was often disguised as care. Caleb stood in the waiting room while she worked, hands clasped, knuckles white. Gunner pressed against his leg, a warm, solid presence. Through the partially open door he could hear the click of instruments, the hiss of an oxygen line, the low murmur of Dr. Whitlock's voice, speaking to her patient in the same calm tones Caleb used. 90 minutes passed like 90 years. When she finally emerged, pulling off blood-stained gloves, her expression was carefully neutral. "He's stable," she said. "The arrow missed the lung but cracked a rib. I've removed it, cleaned the wound, started him on antibiotics and pain management. He'll need rest and monitoring, but he should recover." Caleb released a breath he hadn't known he was holding. "Thank you." Dr. Whitlock studied him for a long moment, her gaze moving from his face to Gunner to the blood on his jacket. Then she made a decision. "Come with me." She led him to her office, a small room crowded with filing cabinets, framed veterinary certificates, and a desk buried under paperwork. From a locked drawer, she withdrew a USB drive and placed it on the desk between them. "This is the 4th dog I've treated with arrow wounds in the past 18 months, she said quietly. "All of them from the same owner, Everett Blackwood." Caleb's jaw tightened. "The second one I treated," she continued, "I found something unusual during surgery." She opened a laptop, inserted the USB, and pulled up a file. On the screen appeared an X-ray image of a dog's torso. Embedded just beneath the skin near the spine was a small rectangular object. "A GPS tracker," Caleb said. "Military grade," Dr. Whitlock confirmed. "Not a standard pet microchip. Something designed for asset tracking. Long range, high precision." She clicked through more images. "I found similar devices in 2 other dogs. Different models, but all well beyond civilian pet technology." "Did you report this?" "To Detective Wade Carver. He's been with the county sheriff's department for over 20 years. I thought he'd investigate." Her mouth pressed into a thin line. "He told me they were just expensive tracking chips, that some wealthy owners used them for security. He said I was overreacting." Caleb stared at the screen, his mind working through the implications. Dogs with military-grade trackers. Dogs being used as targets. Dogs owned by a man with enough money to make problems disappear. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked. Dr. Whitlock met his eyes. "Because you didn't walk away. Because I've been collecting this data for over a year, waiting for someone who would actually do something with it." She ejected the USB and handed it to him. "The tracker from tonight's dog is still active. The data logs show everywhere he's been for the past 90 days. The other 3 as well, until they were removed." Caleb took the drive, feeling its weight in his palm like a grenade with the pin already pulled. "Be careful," Dr. Whitlock added. "Men like Blackwood don't just have money. They have networks, and people who cross them tend to have very unfortunate accidents." The drive back to his trailer felt longer than the drive out. Dawn was breaking pale and cold, turning the snowfall into drifting sheets of gray. Caleb's phone buzzed 3 times during the 20-minute trip. He didn't need to look to know what the messages would say. The first was from his employer, Dunham Logistics. A terse email with the subject line, "Immediate termination." The body of the message cited behavior inconsistent with company values and pending legal matters. His final paycheck would be mailed within 2 weeks. The second was from his landlord, a man Caleb had met twice in 3 years, both times to hand over rent in cash. A notice to vacate the premises within 30 days due to tenant conduct violations and potential liability concerns. The third was a voicemail from an unknown number, a smooth, educated voice that introduced itself as Jonathan Pierce, attorney, representing Mr. Everett Blackwood. The message was brief and professionally threatening: return the dog within 24 hours, or face civil litigation for theft, trespassing, and assault. The damages would be substantial. Criminal charges would follow. Caleb parked the truck and sat in silence, engine ticking as it cooled, watching snowflakes accumulate on the windshield. Gunnar waited beside him, patient and still. He thought about Naomi, about the choice he didn't make, about 7 years of carrying that weight, of waking to nightmares, of wondering if redemption was even possible for someone who'd frozen when it mattered most. He thought about the dog in Dr. Whitlock's clinic, sedated and bandaged, trusting strangers, because he had no other choice. He thought about the GPS data on the USB drive in his pocket, and what it might reveal. Then he climbed out of the truck and went inside. The trailer was small, barely 400 square feet, but it was warm and dry and his, or it had been. In 30 days, he'd be on the street. No job, no references that would survive a background check. No safety net except the meager disability payment the VEA sent every month and the few $100s in his checking account. He should have been afraid, should have been calculating survival, weighing options, planning his next move. Instead, he opened his laptop and inserted the USB drive. The data appeared as a series of map overlays, each representing one of the 4 dogs Dr. Whitlock had treated. Colored lines tracked their movements over weeks and months, creating spiderweb patterns across the county. Most of the activity clustered around the Blackwood estate, which made sense for guard dogs or pets. But there were outliers, long trips north into the mountains. Repeated visits to the same half-dozen locations scattered across 3 counties. Each dog had traveled similar routes, hitting the same waypoints like runners following a predetermined course. Caleb zoomed in on the northernmost point, a location roughly 52 miles from town. The satellite imagery showed dense forest mountain terrain and a single structure, a large building identified as Blackwood Northern Timber Lodge. A hunting retreat according to the property records. Private, gated, no public access. All 4 dogs had visited that location multiple times. The most recent dog, the one recovering at Dr. Whitlock's clinic, had been there 11 times in the past 3 months. Caleb sat back, staring at the screen pieces clicking together in a pattern he didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. Dogs with military-grade trackers, dogs traveling to remote locations, dogs being used as targets once they'd outlived their usefulness. What else could they have witnessed? What else might they have been forced to participate in? A knock at the door made him jump. Gunnar was on his feet instantly, a low, warning rumble building in his chest. Caleb checked the window. A woman stood outside, small and pale in the early morning light, one hand pressed to her left shoulder. Blood seeped between her fingers. He opened the door. She looked up at him with eyes the color of winter sky. Her face tight with pain and something harder. Determination. Desperation. The kind of expression people wore when all the safe options had run out. Caleb Ashford. Her voice was steady despite the way her body shook. Former Navy SEAL, right? Who's asking? Detective Sienna Brennan, County Sheriff. She swayed, caught herself against the doorframe. I need your help. They're coming for me and I don't have much time. Gunnar's growl faded. He stepped forward, nose working, then sat. The signal was clear: wounded, not threat. Caleb reached out and steadied her with one hand. You're shot. Brilliant observation. She tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace. 38 caliber. My partner put it there about 40 minutes ago. He pulled her inside and kicked the door shut. Through the window, headlights swept the road, moving slow, searching. Why? Caleb asked, already moving toward his first aid kit, his mind shifting into combat medic mode, assessing wound location, blood loss, shock risk. Sienna leaned against the wall, her breathing shallow. Because I found something I wasn't supposed to find, because the people I trusted are the people I should have been investigating. She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much and refused to look away. And because 9 women are missing and I know where they are. Outside, the headlights slowed, then stopped. Doors opened. Voices carried on the cold air, low and urgent. Caleb met her gaze. In her face, he saw the same thing he saw in the mirror every morning, someone who'd arrived at the moment where inaction was its own kind of death. "Sit down," he said, "and tell me everything." Caleb's hands moved with the mechanical precision of muscle memory, laying out supplies on the kitchen table while his mind calculated angles and outcomes. Vodka for antiseptic, fishing line for sutures, a pair of needle-nose pliers he'd sterilized over a candle flame. The tools of improvised battlefield medicine learned in places where the nearest hospital was a helicopter ride away and helicopters didn't always come. Sienna Brennan sat in the single wooden chair, her jacket peeled away to reveal the wound. The bullet had entered high on her left shoulder, just below the collarbone. Exit wound in the back, which meant through and through. Lucky if you could call being shot by your partner lucky. The bleeding was steady but not arterial. Survivable if infection didn't set in. "This is going to hurt," Caleb said. "I've been shot before." Her voice was tight, controlled. "Just do it." He poured vodka over the wound. Sienna's jaw clenched, tendons standing out in her neck. But she didn't make a sound. Gunner moved without being asked, pressing his solid bulk against her legs, his weight a steady anchor. She reached down with her good hand and gripped his fur. The headlights outside swept past the trailer again, slower this time, searching. "Tell me about your partner," Caleb said, working quickly, probing the entry wound to make sure no fabric or debris had been carried inside. "Lieutenant Wade Carver, 52 years old, 24 years with the county sheriff's department, decorated, respected." Sienna's breathing hitched as Caleb's fingers found a rough edge where the bullet had chipped bone. "He's been my mentor since I joined 4 years ago. Taught me how to work a crime scene, how to read people, how to survive in a department that still thinks women should be filing reports instead of investigating them. And tonight I found out he's been disappearing evidence for the past 7 months. Missing persons reports, witness statements, security footage." She paused while Caleb threaded the fishing line through a curved needle. 9 women have vanished from this county in the past 2 years, all between the ages of 22 and 31. All last seen in areas covered by sheriff department patrols, no bodies, no ransom demands, just gone. Caleb began stitching, his movements small and precise. "Your guy, Ivy, she's 25, disappeared 7 months ago." Sienna's voice fractured slightly on the name, then steadied. "She was driving home from her shift at Mountain View Diner. Her car was found on Route 47, empty keys still in the ignition. No signs of struggle. Security footage from the diner showed her leaving at 10:15 p.m. She never made it home." Outside, car doors slammed. Voices carried on the wind, too distant to make out words, but close enough to identify intent. Multiple men. Armed, probably. Coordinated. "Keep talking," Caleb said. "I need you focused." I started investigating on my own, quietly. The other 8 women followed similar patterns. Working-class backgrounds, no family with money or connections, last seen on county roads late at night, and every single case was assigned to Lieutenant Carver. Caleb tied off the first stitch and started the second. He was burying them. He was facilitating them. Sienna pulled her phone from her pocket with her good hand, thumbs working across the screen despite the tremor. 3 weeks ago, I started tracking his movements. He has a pattern. Every Friday night he drives north, always the same route. Always between 10 p.m. and midnight. I followed him twice. Both times he ended up at a private road marked no trespassing gates, locked, no way to follow without being spotted. She turned the phone toward Caleb. The screen showed a map with a red pin dropped in mountainous terrain. Property records show it belongs to Blackwood Northern Timber Lodge, owned by Everett Blackwood. Caleb's hands stilled for a fraction of a second. Then he continued, stitching his mind, racing ahead to connections he didn't want to make but couldn't ignore. Tonight, Sienna continued, I waited until Carver left the station. I knew the back access code for the property because I'd watched him punch it in through binoculars. I went alone because I didn't know who else might be involved. Her breathing was coming faster now, pain and memory colliding. There's a warehouse behind the main lodge, industrial, climate-controlled, security cameras everywhere, and inside... She swiped to another image on her phone. Caleb looked at it and felt something cold settle in his gut. The photo showed a large interior space divided into sections by chain-link fencing. In each section a woman, some sitting on thin mattresses, some standing hands gripping the fence. All of them wearing the same blank, hollow expression that came from hope dying by degrees. Sienna swiped again. Another photo. A different angle. He could see 11 women total, 6 of them visibly pregnant. I took 51 photos, she said. Uploaded them to a cloud account before Carver found me. He must have been monitoring the security system remotely. By the time I made it back to my car, he was there parked across the access road blocking my exit. Caleb finished the last stitch and began wrapping gauze around her shoulder. What did he say? He said, some women are just cargo, Sienna. You weren't supposed to see this. You weren't supposed to be smart enough to find it. Her voice had gone flat, effect stripped away by shock. Then he pulled his service weapon and shot me. I got the car started, rammed his vehicle and ran, made it about 8 miles before the adrenaline wore off and I realized I was bleeding out. Why come to me? Because you're the only person I know who's already crossed Everett Blackwood and survived the night. She met his eyes. And because Navy SEALs know how to operate when the system is the enemy. A loud knock rattled the trailer door, not the polite tap of a neighbor, the authoritative pound of someone used to compliance. Sienna. The voice was male, warm, paternal. It carried through the thin walls like oil spreading on water. I know you're in there. Come out. Let's talk about this. You're hurt and you're not thinking clearly. Carver. Gunner's lips peeled back from his teeth, a silent snarl that said he understood tone better than words. Caleb moved to the window and looked out through a gap in the curtains. 2 SUVs sat in the gravel lot outside, their headlights cutting harsh white beams through the falling snow. 6 men stood in a loose formation. 2 wore sheriff's department uniforms, badges catching the light. 4 were civilians dressed in tactical gear, the kind of expensive loadout that contractors and private security favored. All of them carried weapons openly. Wade Carver stood at the front, hands empty, posture relaxed. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair trimmed military short, and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and disappointment. The kind of man who'd spent his whole life being what people expected until the mask became more real than the face beneath. Sienna, he called again. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Whatever you think you saw, we can explain. But you need medical attention, real medical attention. Come out and we'll get you to a hospital. Caleb looked at Sienna. She shook her head once, definitive. He returned to the kitchen, moving quickly and quietly. From a cabinet above the refrigerator, he pulled down a small lockbox and thumbed the combination. Inside were items he'd hoped never to use again. A tactical flashlight, a fixed-blade knife, a compact Glock 19 with 2 spare magazines, and a small emergency radio he'd modified during his second deployment to pick up encrypted frequencies. Back door, he said, handing Sienna the radio. We go now while they're focused on negotiation. She stood, swaying slightly, then steadied herself with one hand on the wall. They'll follow. Let them. We're not running away. We're running toward. Caleb pulled on his winter coat, checked the Glock's chamber, and clipped a spare magazine to his belt. "You said Ivy is at that warehouse. How long before they move the women?" "Carver knows I uploaded the photos. Even if they're password protected, he'll assume I sent them to someone. Standard procedure would be to evacuate the site within 12 hours. Then we have less than that." Caleb opened the back door as quietly as aging hinges allowed. Cold air rushed in, carrying snow and the distant sound of Carver's voice, still calling through the front door, reasonable and patient and utterly false. They slipped out into the darkness. Gunnar went first, low and silent, his black coat rendering him nearly invisible against the shadows. Caleb followed, one hand steadying Sienna, the other holding the Glock at low ready. Behind them, the trailer sat like a decoy light, still burning, door still closed. They made it 20 yards before the shouting started. "They're running backside." Flashlight beams swung through the trees, boots crunched in snow. Commands were shouted, sharp and clipped, the language of men who'd trained together, who knew each other's movements, who'd done this before. Caleb and Sienna ran. The forest swallowed them. Pine trees stood like sentinels, their branches heavy with snow, creating a canopy that blocked most of the ambient light from town. Visibility dropped to a few feet. Temperature dropped with it, the cold biting through clothes and finding skin. Caleb's breath came in controlled bursts, his back screaming with every jarring step, old shrapnel grinding against nerve endings. Sienna kept pace despite the bullet wound, despite the blood loss, despite everything. She moved with the grim determination of someone who'd already decided that stopping meant dying. Gunnar ranged ahead, his form appearing and disappearing in the snow, a ghost made of muscle and purpose. He didn't bark, didn't give away their position. He simply led, trusting Caleb to follow the same way they'd moved through hostile territory when the dog had worn a flag patch and Caleb had worn sergeant's stripes. Behind them, the pursuit spread out. Flashlights became a constellation of moving stars. Some close, some distant, all searching. A radio crackled voice, distorted by static and distance. Caleb changed direction, angling northwest away from town and deeper into the mountains. Sienna stumbled, caught herself, kept moving. "How far?" she gasped. "1.5 miles. There's an old forestry station. Abandoned for 10 years, but the structure's still sound. They'll find us, probably. But we need to stop your bleeding and figure out what's on that USB drive." They ran in silence after that saving breath for movement. The forest floor rose and fell in waves, each hill steeper than the last, each descent treacherous with hidden roots and ice-slicked stone. Snow fell heavier now, thick flakes that clung to hair and clothes and made the world feel smaller, more compressed, as if the sky were collapsing incrementally. Caleb checked behind them every 30 seconds. The flashlights were gaining, not rapidly but steadily. Professionals who knew how to pace themselves, who understood that panic was the enemy and patience was the weapon. Gunnar stopped suddenly, ears forward, body tense. Caleb froze, raising one hand to halt Sienna. In the silence, he heard what the dog had sensed, voices to the left, maybe 50 yards out, moving parallel to their path. They'd been flanked. He adjusted course again, angling right, sacrificing speed for stealth. They picked their way through a dense stand of lodgepole pine branches, scraping at their faces, snow dumping from disturbed boughs. The forestry station appeared like a gift from a god Caleb wasn't sure he still believed in. It was a small structure, barely more than a cabin, built from logs that had weathered to gray. The windows were intact but filthy. The door hung crooked on its hinges. A stone chimney rose from one end, capped with a rusted mesh screen. No lights, no tracks in the snow, no sign that anyone had visited in months. Caleb tested the door. It opened with a groan that sounded like judgment. Inside, the air was stale and cold, but mercifully out of the wind. A single room, maybe 20 feet square. In one corner stood an ancient potbelly stove, its surface scaled with rust. Against the far wall, a wooden table and 2 chairs, one missing a leg. Shelves held the detritus of abandonment, empty coffee cans, moldering paperback novels, a mouse-chewed map of the forest district, and mounted on the wall a radio. Old tube-based, the kind the Forestry Service had used in the 70s for firewatch communication. Caleb crossed to it and checked the connections. The power cable ran to a solar panel on the roof, supplemented by a battery backup. The indicator light was dead, but when he flipped the switch, static crackled from the speaker, still functional, barely. "Sienna, the radio. Can you broadcast from here?" She moved to the device, her good hand already adjusting dials. Her training kicking in despite the pain and exhaustion. "Frequency. Try emergency channels first, then state police, FBI if you can reach them." While she worked, Caleb crossed to the window and looked out. The forest was quiet now. Too quiet. The pursuit had stopped moving, which meant they'd either lost the trail or they were surrounding the building. He suspected the latter. Gunnar sat near the door, ears rotating like radar dishes, tracking sounds Caleb couldn't hear. "This is Detective Sienna Brennan, badge number 4732. Sienna said into the microphone, her voice professionally calm despite the way her hand shook. "I am requesting immediate assistance. Officer-involved shooting. Multiple suspects. I have evidence of human trafficking operation at coordinates 48.1 degrees north, 114.6 degrees west. Repeat, human trafficking with law enforcement involvement. Request FBI immediate response." Static answered. She adjusted the frequency and tried again. "This is Detective Sienna Brennan, officer-involved shooting, requesting FBI, coordinates 48.1 north, 114.6 west, multiple victims, repeat, multiple victims." More static, then faint and broken by interference. "Copy your transmission, difficult, repeat coordinates." Sienna did her voice stronger now. Hope cutting through the shock. She gave their current location, described the situation in terse military brevity, named Wade Carver and Everett Blackwood explicitly. The response was garbled, but one phrase came through clearly. "FBI Field Office, Missoula. ETA unknown. Hold position." She released the transmit button and sagged against the table. "They heard me. I don't know if it was enough. It's more than we had 5 minutes ago." Caleb pulled out his phone and checked the time. Nearly 7 a.m. The sky outside was lightening to a pale gray dawn, struggling through heavy cloud cover. How long before Blackwood moves the women? If Carver told him I broadcast our location, they'll evacuate within the hour. Caleb did the math. 52 miles to the timber lodge, minimum 90 minutes by road in good weather, probably 2 hours in this storm. The FBI would take longer, coming from Missoula, navigating mountain roads, coordinating response. By the time they arrived, the warehouse would be empty, the women scattered or dead and evidence erased. He pulled the USB drive from his pocket and looked at it. 4 dogs, 4 sets of GPS data, all leading to the same location. An idea formed, terrible and necessary. "The dog at Dr. Whitlock's clinic," he said. "The one I pulled off Blackwood's target. He knows the way to the timber lodge. He's traveled it 11 times. Sienna stared at him. "You want to follow a wounded dog through a blizzard? I want to get there before Blackwood erases the evidence, before he moves your sister." Caleb met her eyes. "The FBI will come, but they'll come too late. We go now, we have a chance." "We," she almost smiled. "You're saying that like I'm coming with you. You can barely stand. I can pull a trigger." She checked her service weapon, a Glock 22, and verified the magazine. "And if Ivy is there, if I have one chance to get her out, I'm taking it." Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she'd slow him down, that the bullet wound would kill her before they made it halfway, that this was a suicide mission, even for someone in peak condition. But he looked at her face and saw himself 7 years ago, standing on the bank of Miller's Pond, frozen with indecision, while his sister drowned. "All right," he said, "but I go get the dog first. You stay here and keep broadcasting every 10 minutes. Make sure the FBI knows what's happening." Before she could respond, Gunnar's growl cut through the room, low, dangerous, final warning. Caleb moved to the window. 3 men stood at the edge of the tree line, maybe 40 yards out. 2 more emerged from the opposite direction. They weren't approaching, just watching, surrounding. Wade Carver's voice carried across the snow, amplified by a megaphone. Caleb Ashford, we've confirmed your identity, former Navy SEAL, honorable discharge, no criminal record. A pause. You're a good man who made a bad decision tonight, but it's not too late. Send Sienna out. She needs medical attention. You need to walk away from something you don't understand. Caleb said nothing. I know what you're thinking, Carver continued. You're thinking this is about right and wrong. It's not. It's about reality. Some people are always going to fall through the cracks. Some women are always going to disappear. We didn't create that system. We just learned how to profit from it. Sienna's face had gone white, not from blood loss, but from rage. You have 5 minutes, Carver said. Then we come in, and I promise you that will not end the way you want it to. The megaphone clicked off. Silence returned, broken only by wind and the soft hiss of falling snow. Caleb looked at Sienna. Back door. Already thought of it. Look. He moved to the rear window. 2 more men stood in the trees behind the cabin, rifles held at low ready. 6 outside that they could see, probably more in the woods, all of them armed, all of them willing to kill to protect whatever operation Blackwood had built. We're trapped, Sienna said quietly. Gunner whined, a sound Caleb had heard exactly once before in a compound in Syria when insurgents had surrounded their position and extraction was 3 hours away. The sound a dog makes when he knows the odds but refuses to abandon his human. Caleb knelt and gripped Gunner's face in both hands, looking into those amber eyes. Not yet, he whispered. We're not done yet. He stood and crossed to the potbelly stove, ancient but functional. He opened the firebox and found the remnants of old kindling and a few pieces of split wood dry as bone after a decade. In a cabinet he found a can of kerosene left by long-gone forestry workers. Sienna watched him work. What are you doing? You're creating a diversion. He soaked the wood in kerosene and struck a match. Fire caught instantly, roaring to life, flames licking hungrily at the dry fuel. Thick black smoke began to pour from the chimney. They'll think we're trying to stay warm, Sienna said. For about 2 minutes, then they'll realize smoke means fire, means panic, means opportunity. Caleb moved to the front door. When they come in, we go out, fast, before they regroup. Where? Dr. Whitlock's clinic. We get the dog. We follow him north. He checked his Glock one more time. After that, we improvise. The smoke thickened, billowing from the chimney in a dark column that rose and flattened against the low clouds. Through the window, Caleb saw the men outside exchange glances, radios raised to lips. 30 seconds. The fire in the stove roared, hotter flames visible through the vents. Heat building until the air inside the cabin shimmered. 20 seconds. Sienna moved beside him, weapon drawn. Her face set in the expression of someone who'd already made peace with the cost. 10 seconds. Gunner's muscles coiled, ready. The front door exploded inward, boot meeting wood hinges tearing free. 2 men came through, fet weapons up, flashlights mounted to barrels cutting white cones through the smoke. Caleb and Sienna were already moving, bursting through the back door into the gray dawn. The 2 guards stationed there had taken 3 steps toward the front of the cabin, drawn by the commotion. They were turning when Gunner hit the first 180 pounds of momentum in training jaws closing on a forearm, the man's rifle clattering into snow. Caleb took the second guard with a shoulder check that sent them both sprawling. He came up first, Glock trained on the man's center mass. Stay down, he said quietly. The man, younger than Caleb, maybe 25, with scared eyes and expensive tactical gear, nodded. They ran. Sienna led, moving with the instinct of someone who'd grown up in these mountains, who knew the terrain like memory. Caleb followed Gunner, ranging between them, covering their retreat with tactical precision that would have made his handlers proud. Behind them, shouts erupted. Flashlights swung wildly, but the smoke from the cabin created a screen and the thick snowfall created confusion. And for 30 precious seconds they disappeared into the white wilderness like ghosts dissolving at dawn. They ran hard for a quarter mile before Sienna's legs gave out. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground, feeling fresh blood warm and wet against his hands where her stitches had torn. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, her skin clammy with shock. Can't, she managed. Can't keep going. Yes, you can. He pulled her arm across his shoulders, taking most of her weight. Because 11 women are counting on you. Because Ivy is counting on you. She looked at him, eyes glassy but focused. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't know them. Caleb thought of Naomi's hand pressed against the window, of 7 years carrying weight that never got lighter. Because last time I didn't, he said, and I've been drowning ever since. They moved again, slower now, Sienna's feet dragging Caleb's back, screaming Gunner, circling them like a protective satellite. The pursuit had reorganized, flashlights visible through the trees, moving with purpose, but they were heading the wrong direction. Caleb had angled east toward town when the obvious escape route was north. Carver would expect them to run for help, for civilization, for safety. He wouldn't expect them to double back. 20 minutes later, they emerged from the tree line 2 blocks from Mountain Ridge Animal Clinic. Dr. Whitlock's Subaru still occupied the parking lot. Lights still glowed in the windows. When Caleb knocked, she opened the door immediately, took one look at them, and stepped aside. Surgical suite, she said. Now. While she restitched Sienna's shoulder with real medical supplies and skill that made Caleb's fieldwork look like butchery, he explained. All of it. The trafficking, the GPS trackers, the warehouse, the time running out. Dr. Whitlock listened without interrupting, her hands steady even as her expression darkened. The dog you brought in, Caleb finished. You said the tracker shows he's been to Blackwood's Timber Lodge 11 times. I need him to take me there. He's sedated, recovering from surgery. Wake him up. That's insane. He needs rest. The wound needs time to heal. 9 women don't have time. Caleb held her gaze. If there was another way, I'd take it. But the roads will be watched. GPS will just get me to the property line. I need someone who knows the back ways, the routes Blackwood's people use. Dr. Whitlock was quiet for a long moment. Then she crossed to a locked cabinet and removed a vial of clear liquid. Reversal agent for the sedative. It'll wake him up, but he'll be in pain, significant pain. She prepared a syringe, and I want it on record that I think this is cruel and probably suicidal. Noted. She led him to the recovery area where the dog lay on a padded table, bandaged and breathing slowly. In sleep, his face had relaxed, the wariness smoothed away. He looked younger, almost peaceful. Dr. Whitlock administered the injection. 30 seconds passed. The dog's breathing changed, quickening. His eyes opened amber and confused. He saw Caleb and growled, a reflex of fear. Easy, Caleb murmured, the same tone he'd used the night before. You're safe. No one's going to hurt you. The dog's growl faded. His eyes tracked Caleb's face, reading intention the way dogs do, with an honesty humans had forgotten. Caleb opened the laptop and pulled up the GPS data, finding the location of Blackwood Northern Timber Lodge. Then he did something that felt insane even as he did it. He turned the screen toward the dog and pointed at the map. I need to go here, he said. Can you show me? The dog looked at the screen, looked at Caleb, looked at Gunner, who sat nearby, posture calm, expression saying, I trust this human. You can too. Then slowly the older dog stood, winced, steadied himself, and walked to the door. Dr. Whitlock stared. That's not possible. Military working dogs are trained to recognize map coordinates, Caleb said. It's rare, but some of the elite units teach it. Pattern recognition combined with scent memory. He opened the door. The dog stepped out into the parking lot, lifted his nose to the wind, and oriented north. Behind them, Sienna emerged from the surgical suite, her shoulder freshly bandaged, her color better. She'd found a heavy coat somewhere and a borrowed rifle. FBI won't reach the lodge for at least 2 hours, she said. Radio contact is intermittent. Agent Drummond is en route from Missoula, but the roads are bad. Then we go now. Caleb looked at the 2 dogs, at Sienna, at the storm gathering strength outside. 52 miles, through a blizzard, to break into a guarded facility and rescue 11 women before they're moved or killed. When you say it like that, it sounds impossible, Sienna said. Good thing impossible is just a word. They loaded into Caleb's truck. The older dog, who Caleb had started thinking of as Atlas even though he didn't know the animal's real name, sat in the back with Gunner. Sienna rode shotgun rifle across her lap, her jaw set against pain. Caleb started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot just as the first police cruiser came screaming down Main Street lights, flashing heading toward the forestry station they'd abandoned an hour ago. Atlas barked once, a short, sharp sound, then pressed his nose to the rear window looking north. Caleb followed. The road north disappeared into white emptiness asphalt, becoming suggestion the world reduced to what the truck's headlights could carve from the storm. Snow fell in sheets now horizontal when the wind gusted, accumulating faster than the wipers could clear it. Visibility dropped to 20 feet, then 10, then nothing but swirling white, and the occasional ghost of a tree appearing like a warning before vanishing again. Caleb drove with both hands locked on the wheel, feeling the tires search for traction on ice they couldn't see. The truck fishtailed around curves, engine whining in low gear, four-wheel drive, grinding through drifts that rose higher with each passing mile. Beside him, Sienna had her phone open, watching the GPS coordinates crawl north, comparing them against the map data from the USB drive. In the back seat, Atlas stood with his front paws braced against the window, nose pressed to the glass despite the cold radiating through. Every few minutes he'd shift position, angling his head left or right, and Caleb would adjust their heading accordingly. The dog was navigating by scent memory even through the storm, following invisible trails only he could detect. Gunner sat quieter, more still, his gaze fixed on Caleb's reflection in the rearview mirror. Waiting. Ready. The way he'd waited in a dozen forward operating bases, knowing that stillness before action was its own kind of discipline. They'd been driving for 40 minutes when Sienna's phone buzzed. She answered, putting it on speaker. "Brennan, Detective Brennan, this is Agent Kathleen Drummond, FBI Field Office, Missoula." The voice was crisp, professional, fighting against static. "We received your distress call. What's your current status?" "En route to the target location, approximately 12 miles out." Sienna glanced at Caleb, then made a decision. "I'm with a civilian consultant, former Navy SEAL. We have reason to believe the victims will be moved within the hour if we don't intercede." A pause. "Detective, I need you to stop and hold position. We have a tactical team 40 minutes behind you. Do not attempt to engage." "With respect, Agent Drummond, 40 minutes is 39 minutes too late. This is not a request. You are wounded, you have an untrained civilian, and you're walking into a fortified position with unknown hostiles. If you engage now, you will die and the victims will be moved anyway." Sienna looked at Caleb. He kept his eyes on the road, jaw tight. "I understand your concern," Sienna said carefully, "but my sister is in that building, and the man who shot me is on his way there right now to erase the evidence. I can't wait." Static filled the cab. Then, "God damn it. All right, approach only, recon only, do not engage. Mark the location, count hostiles, and get clear. My team will handle extraction. Are we clear? Crystal. And detective, keep this line open. I want real-time updates." "Copy that." Sienna ended the call and looked at Caleb. "She's right, you know. This is insane." "Sanity is a luxury." Caleb downshifted as the road pitched upward, the truck's engine roaring. "We're past that now." The GPS showed they were close. 3 miles, then 2. Atlas began to whine, a high, anxious sound that made Gunner's ears flatten. The older dog was remembering. Whatever he'd experienced at this place, the memory was written in his bones. 1 mile out, Caleb killed the headlights and slowed to a crawl, navigating by the faint gray luminescence of snow under cloud-filtered dawn. The road narrowed, became a private drive marked by a gate that hung open, swinging slightly in the wind. No guards visible, no vehicles, just tire tracks in fresh snow, multiple sets recent. They'd already started evacuating. Caleb pulled the truck off the road and into a copse of lodgepole pine branches, scraping the roof snow, dumping onto the windshield. He killed the engine. In the sudden silence, their breathing sounded too loud. "Recon only," Sienna said quietly. "That was the deal. You really believe that?" "No." She checked her rifle hands, moving with practiced efficiency despite the pain radiating from her shoulder. But I wanted to hear myself say it, make it official that I tried. Caleb pulled the Glock from his waistband and chambered around. The sound was sharp and final in the enclosed space. Rules of engagement. Protect the innocent. Everything else is negotiable. They stepped out into the storm. The cold hit like a physical blow, temperature well below zero, wind chill, pushing it to the kind of extremes where exposed skin froze in minutes. Caleb pulled his hood tight and started moving, boots sinking 6 inches with each step. Atlas led, limping slightly but determined, following a route only he could sense. Gunner flanked, moving in tactical bounds, clearing sectors the way his handlers had drilled into him over 2 deployments. Sienna brought up the rear, rifle at low ready. Her breathing controlled despite the way each step jarred her wound. The timber lodge appeared gradually resolving from white cade like a photograph developing. The main building was large, 2 stories of dark wood and stone, designed to look rustic but built with the kind of money that made rustic a performance. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys. Lights glowed in several windows. But it was the structure behind the main lodge that drew Caleb's attention. A warehouse exactly as Sienna had described. Prefabricated metal construction 60 feet wide and maybe 100 deep, with industrial ventilation units on the roof and no windows. A single door on the near side, steel with a keypad lock. Security cameras mounted at each corner, their lenses already accumulating snow. 4 vehicles sat in the cleared area between buildings. 2 pickup trucks, a black SUV Caleb recognized from the pursuit through the forest, and a sheriff's department cruiser. Carver was here. They crouched behind a utility shed 30 yards from the warehouse, watching, counting, calculating. Through the storm, Caleb could see movement inside the main lodge. Figures crossing past windows. He counted at least 6, possibly more. Atlas whined again, softer this time, his whole body trembling. Gunner pressed against him, offering warmth and solidarity. Sienna's phone buzzed silently. She checked it and her face went tight. Text from Ivy's number. I didn't know she still had her phone. She turned the screen toward Caleb. The message was 3 words: help us, please. That's not recon anymore, Sienna whispered. Before Caleb could respond, the warehouse door opened. 2 men emerged, both armed, both wearing tactical gear. Between them walked a woman, mid-20s, visibly pregnant, hands zip-tied in front of her. She was crying silently, her face blank with the kind of terror that had burned through panic and arrived at numb acceptance. They walked her to one of the pickup trucks and loaded her into the covered bed. Through the canvas, Caleb could see other shapes, other women. They were loading human cargo. A 3rd man emerged from the warehouse, taller, older, moving with the confident authority of someone used to giving orders. Everett Blackwood. He wore a heavy parka over what looked like expensive clothes, as if torture and trafficking were just another business meeting requiring proper attire. He was speaking into a phone, his voice carrying faintly across the snow. FBI involvement confirmed. We move now. Denver hub can process them. I don't care about the cost, Wade. I care about containment. He listened for a moment, then, the Ashford problem is your responsibility. You said you'd handle it, so handle it. He ended the call and turned back toward the warehouse just as another man emerged. Wade Carver. The lieutenant looked like he'd aged a decade in 12 hours. His face was haggard, eyes, red-rimmed jaw shadowed with stubble. He carried a rifle in one hand and a duffel bag in the other, moving with the heavy steps of a man carrying weight that wasn't physical. How many left inside? Blackwood asked. 7. The rest are already loaded or at secondary locations. And the evidence? Servers are being wiped remotely. Paper files are in the burn pile. By the time the feds arrive, this will just be an empty warehouse. Blackwood smiled, a thin expression without warmth. See, crisis averted. You just had to think clearly. I shot my partner, Everett. I killed any chance I had at a clean retirement. You protected an investment. That's capitalism. Blackwood checked his watch. Load the last 7 and torch the building. I want to be across state lines before noon. He walked toward the main lodge, leaving Carver standing alone in the snow, a silhouette of despair and compromise. Sienna's hand found Caleb's arm, gripping tight. 7 women still inside. One of them is Ivy. Caleb was already moving his mind, sliding into the tactical calculations that had kept him alive through 3 deployments. We create a diversion. Pull the guards away from the warehouse. You go in, get the women out. What kind of diversion? The loud kind. He pulled his phone and typed a message to Agent Drummond at target location. Hostiles moving victims now. 7 women still inside warehouse. If we don't act, they leave in 5 minutes. Need immediate support. The response came 30 seconds later. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. ETA 16 minutes. Caleb showed it to Sienna. 16 minutes. They'll be gone in 5. I know. He looked at the 2 dogs. Gunnar met his gaze with absolute trust. Atlas, despite his pain and fear, sat at attention, waiting for purpose. Here's what we do, Caleb said. 3 minutes later, Caleb walked out of cover and into the open hands-raised Glock tucked in his waistband at the small of his back, where the heavy coat concealed it. Carver, he shouted. Lieutenant Wade, Carver. The effect was immediate. Men appeared from the main lodge, weapons rising. Carver spun rifle coming up his face, cycling through surprise to recognition to something that might have been regret. Ashford, Carver's voice carried across the snow. You're persistent. I'll give you that. Let the women go. They're not part of whatever deal you made with Blackwood. They're innocent. No one's innocent. That's the first lie we teach children. Carver began walking forward, rifle held loosely. Everyone makes compromises. Everyone serves themselves. You did it in the Navy. I did it in the department. The only difference is honesty. I never sold people. You killed them, though. Orders are orders, right? Who's worse, the man who sells cargo or the man who pulls the trigger for a flag? Caleb said. Nothing. Just kept walking forward, closing distance, drawing attention. Behind Carver, he could see 4 men exiting the main lodge, spreading out. 2 more emerged from the warehouse. 7 hostiles visible. Maybe more inside. Atlas and Gunnar were already moving, circling wide through the trees, flanking toward the back of the warehouse, where Sienna waited in cover. I'm tired, Ashford. Carver stopped 20 feet away. I'm tired of pretending I'm something I'm not. Tired of the weight, you know what I mean. You got out of the service because you couldn't carry it anymore either. I got out because I wanted to stop killing. And here you are anyway. Funny how that works. Movement in Caleb's peripheral vision. Blackwood emerging from the main lodge, phone in hand, watching with the detached interest of someone viewing an unexpected performance. Last chance, Carver said. Walk away. I'll tell Blackwood you were never here. You go back to your trailer, your dog, your small life. Nobody has to die. Except the 7 women in that building. They were already gone the moment they got in the wrong car, trusted the wrong person, took the wrong shift. I'm not the villain, Ashford. I'm just the accountant tallying what was already spent. Caleb's hand moved, a blur of motion, Glock clearing his waistband and rising in one smooth draw born of 1,000 repetitions. But Carver was fast too. Old training. Good instincts. The rifle came up, finger already on the trigger. Then 80 pounds of German Shepherd hit Carver from the side. Gunnar's attack was textbook perfect. He'd been taught to disable, not kill, to control without destroying. His jaws closed on Carver's rifle, arm weight and momentum carrying them both down into the snow, the rifle discharging once, the bullet going wild into the gray sky. The other men opened fire. Caleb was already moving, diving behind the pickup truck as bullets sparked off metal and shattered windows. He came up on one knee and returned fire, 3 controlled shots that dropped the nearest hostile before he could adjust his aim. From the warehouse, more gunfire erupted, but not aimed at Caleb, aimed inward. Sienna had breached the back entrance. The next 90 seconds became chaos distilled to its purest form. Caleb moved through it on reflex and training, the cold clarity that came when death was present and immediate. He engaged 2 more hostiles, dropping one, forcing the other into cover. Gunner released Carver and circled back to Caleb's position, taking up guard, his muzzle red with blood that wasn't his. Atlas, despite his wound, despite his pain, had entered the warehouse through the door Sienna had forced open. Through the building's walls, Caleb heard barking, screaming gunfire. Then Blackwood's voice, loud and commanding, "Secure the assets! Do not let them leave!" Caleb sprinted for the warehouse, Gunner at his heels, rounds kicking up snow around them. He hit the door and rolled inside, Glock up, scanning for targets. The interior was worse than the photos suggested. Chain-link pens divided the space. In each pen, thin mattresses and buckets, and the smell of fear made manifest. 7 women huddled in 3 of the pens, most of them pregnant, all of them filthy and malnourished and marked by violence. Sienna was cutting zip ties with a knife, moving from pen to pen, her wounded shoulder, making each motion agony but not stopping her. 2 of Blackwood's men lay on the concrete floor, one unconscious, one bleeding out from a center mass shot. A third guard emerged from behind a stack of crates, weapon rising toward Sienna's unprotected back. Atlas hit him low, jaws closing on a knee, the man's scream cutting short as his leg buckled and his head struck concrete with a wet crack. "Move!" Caleb shouted. "Out the back, now!" The women stumbled toward the rear exit, helping each other. But one couldn't walk. She was on her knees, doubled over, breathing in short gasps that turned to screams. "Ivy." Sienna dropped beside her. "No, no, no, not now, Ivy. We have to move." "Can't." Ivy gasped. Her face was pale, slick with sweat despite the cold. "Contractions. They started when the shooting. I can't stop them." Caleb's training kicked in before conscious thought. He'd delivered 3 babies during his deployments, twice in field conditions worse than this. He knelt, placed a hand on Ivy's shoulder. "Sienna, get the others out. I've got her. I'm not leaving my sister. You are. Because if those other 6 women don't get clear, this was for nothing." He met her eyes. "I've done this before. I know what I'm doing. Get them to safety. Come back when it's clear." Sienna's face twisted with conflict. Then she nodded once, stood, and began herding the other women toward the exit, rifle up, covering their retreat. Caleb was alone with Ivy, 2 dogs, and the sound of footsteps approaching from the front of the warehouse. "Okay," he said, forcing his voice calm. "I need you to breathe with me. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Can you do that?" Ivy nodded, tears streaming. Another contraction hit. She screamed, body curling. Caleb checked quickly. Dilation was advanced, 7, maybe 8 centimeters. The baby was coming whether they wanted it to or not. "Gunner guard!" The dog took position at the door, low growl building. Atlas limped over and lay down beside Ivy, pressing his warm bulk against her side. She grabbed his fur with one hand, anchoring herself. Voices from the front of the warehouse, Blackwood. "Check every pen. Shoot anyone who resists." Caleb had maybe 2 minutes before they were discovered. He worked fast, pulling off his jacket, laying it beneath Ivy. Another contraction, stronger. She bit down on a scream, muffling it. "You're doing great," Caleb whispered. "Better than great. But I need you quiet. Can you stay quiet?" She nodded, teeth clenched. He checked again. 9 centimeters. Almost there. Footsteps closer now. 30 feet. 20. Gunner's growl deepened. "Not yet," Caleb breathed. "Wait." 10 feet. A man's silhouette appeared, backlit by the warehouse lights. Gunner launched. The attack was silent, efficient, brutal. The man went down without a sound, Gunner's jaws locked on his throat, applying just enough pressure to cut off air without crushing the windpipe. Unconscious in 8 seconds, but the gunshot from earlier had drawn others. Back section, I heard something. Caleb had no choice. He pulled the Glock, fired 3 suppressive rounds toward the voices, then turned back to Ivy. "Listen to me. Next contraction you push. Push like your life depends on it, because it does." The contraction came. Ivy bore down, her face turning red, veins standing out in her neck. Atlas pressed closer, a living pillow. Caleb saw the crown of the baby's head. "Again! One more! You can do this!" Gunfire erupted. Rounds punched through the metal walls, sparking, ricocheting. Caleb covered Ivy's body with his own, feeling bullets pass inches overhead. Then returned fire from a different direction. Sienna had come back laying down, covering fire from the rear exit. Another contraction. Ivy pushed. The baby slid free into Caleb's hands, tiny and slick and utterly silent. For one horrible second, Caleb's training failed him. The baby wasn't breathing, wasn't crying, just limp and blue in his hands. He cleared the mouth and nose with his fingers, turned the infant over, supported the head, and gave 2 gentle puffs of air. Nothing. 2 more. A cough, a sputter, then a cry. Thin and reedy but real, the most beautiful sound Caleb had ever heard. He wrapped the baby in his thermal shirt, placed her on Ivy's chest. "It's a girl. She's okay. You're both okay." Ivy was sobbing, cradling her daughter with trembling hands. More gunfire, closer. "We have to move," Caleb said. I can't walk." "You don't have to." He scooped her up, baby and all, ignoring the scream from his lower back where old shrapnel ground against nerve. Sienna appeared at his side, rifle smoking. "FBI's 2 minutes out. Can you hear the helicopters?" Caleb could. The distant whoop, whoop, whoop cutting through the storm. They ran for the back exit, Ivy cradled in Caleb's arms. The baby pressed between them both. Dogs flanking. Behind them, Blackwood's voice, burn it all." They cleared the warehouse just as flames erupted from the front section. Someone had ignited the accelerant they'd planned to use. The fire spread fast, feeding on wooden pallets and chemical containers. Black smoke poured into the gray sky. Caleb didn't stop until they reached the tree line where the other 6 women huddled. He set Ivy down, gently checked the baby again. 4 pounds, maybe less, premature but breathing strong, fingers and toes all accounted for. Ivy looked up at him, exhausted, terrified, grateful. "Thank you. God, thank you." He just nodded, throat too tight for words. The helicopters arrived, then 2 of them, FBI markings clear. They came in low and fast, rotor wash, blowing snow in blinding sheets. Behind them, a convoy of vehicles appeared on the access road, lights flashing. Agent Kathleen Drummond's voice echoed from a bullhorn. "FBI weapons down. Get on the ground now." Blackwood's men looked at each other, looked at the burning warehouse, looked at the helicopters descending. One by one, they dropped their weapons and knelt in the snow. Carver was still on the ground where Gunner had taken him down, cradling his mangled arm, his face a mask of pain and defeat. Only Blackwood remained standing. For a long moment he stared at Caleb across the smoke and snow, 2 men who'd both learned that money and violence could buy almost anything except immunity from consequence. Then FBI agents swarmed, shouting commands, securing suspects, establishing a perimeter. Agent Drummond herself approached Caleb. She was tall, late 40s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen enough lies to recognize truth when it was bleeding in the snow. "You're Ashford?" "Yes, ma'am." "You just violated about 15 federal laws." "Yes, ma'am." "After I take your statement and chew you out properly, I'm buying you a drink and recommending you for a civilian commendation." She looked at Ivy and the baby. "You delivered that child in a firefight. Didn't have much choice?" She almost smiled. "We found evidence of 63 victims processed through this location over 17 years. Because you didn't wait for permission, 11 women are alive who'd be dead or gone by nightfall." Paramedics arrived, wrapping Ivy and the baby in thermal blankets, starting IVs, speaking in calm medical tones. One of them, a woman in her 30s, looked at the baby and then at Caleb with something like awe. "You do this often?" "3rd time. 1st time under fire. Well, you didn't screw it up. That's saying something." They loaded Ivy into an ambulance. Before the doors closed, she reached out and grabbed Caleb's hand. "I'm naming her Naomi," she said, "after someone who deserved a second chance." Caleb's vision blurred. He managed a nod. Hours became a blur. Federal agents processed the scene with meticulous care. Caleb gave his statement to Agent Drummond, who typed everything with efficient precision and the occasional shake of her head. 23 officers across 3 states, she said at one point. Carver's talking, wants a deal, he's giving us everything. And Blackwood, lawyered up. But we don't need his cooperation, the women's testimony, the physical evidence, your GPS data. She paused. How did you know to track the dogs? I didn't. Dr. Whitlock did. I just followed the thread. She closed her laptop and looked at him directly. The Bureau needs people like you. Contract work. Tactical consulting. Think about it. She handed him a card. By sunset, the storm had passed. The sky cleared to deep purple stars emerging one by one. Caleb sat on the tailgate of his truck, both dogs beside him watching the FBI team's work. Sienna approached, arm in a sling, exhausted but whole. Ivy and the baby are stable. They're calling her a miracle. She's a fighter, like her aunt. Sienna sat beside him. I put you in my report. Recommended you for a state citation. Probably won't amount to much, but it's on record. I didn't do it for recognition. I know. That's why it matters. 6 months later, Caleb stood in a small office in downtown Helena, watching people move past on the street below. The nameplate on the door read Northern Montana Human Trafficking Task Force. Inside, 14 people worked at desks covered with case files and evidence. Sienna, now Detective Sergeant, ran the operation with fierce determination. Agent Drummond had transferred to provide federal support. Dr. Whitlock consulted on cases involving animal exploitation. On one wall hung 9 photographs, faces of people still missing, still being searched for, still not forgotten. On another wall, a group photo from Blackwood's trial. Caleb, Sienna, Drummond, Whitlock, and 11 women, some holding babies born after their rescue. Not all smiling. Trauma didn't erase that easily, but alive, free. Together, Blackwood had received 50 years in federal prison, Carver 28, 19 other officers serving various sentences. The work continued because trafficking was Hydra-headed. Cut off one network, 2 more grew. Caleb's phone rang. Ashford, we've got a hit on the Johnson case. Victim spotted at a truck stop in Idaho. Local PD has eyes on. Tell them to maintain visual. We're en route. He grabbed his jacket. Gunner and Atlas rose from their beds, moving with the easy coordination of a bonded pack. They'd become inseparable, the young warrior and the old scout, each teaching the other about survival and purpose. Sienna met him at the elevator. Idaho. Looks like it. Outside, Montana spread vast and beautiful under a sky so blue it hurt. Caleb breathed deep, feeling purpose settle across his shoulders like a familiar weight. 7 years ago, he'd stood on the bank of Miller's Pond and let fear make his decisions. He'd frozen when action was required, and that hesitation had cost a life. He couldn't change that, couldn't erase it. But he could choose differently now, could move when others froze. Could risk everything for people he'd never met because somewhere, somehow it mattered that someone stood between cruelty and the innocent. Grace, he'd learned, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about refusing to let the past write the future. The dogs jumped into the truck. Sienna started the engine, and Caleb Ashford, former Navy SEAL, former warehouse worker, former man frozen by his own fear, headed north toward another mission, another chance. Another opportunity to prove that waiting for permission was no longer who he was. The work continued. The mission continued. And for the first time in 7 years, that felt like enough.